Okay, class, lecture number 23. We are winding things down here very quickly. All right, during our last lecture, we talked about the overseas explorations of Spain, Portugal, particularly the Portuguese. They were the ones that initiated this. We talked about Prince Henry. I hope you recognize Prince Henry. From 1418 to about 1460, he organized about 15 different voyages. Somewhere through here, we also talked about other explorers. Bartholomew Diaz, the first around the southern tip of Africa. We also mentioned Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama made his trek, if you will, over to India and safely returned. And we also talked about Pedro Cabral. Christopher Columbus in his 4 voyages to the New World. I hope you're familiar with all of that by now. And then we also mentioned about the Vikings with Leif Erikson. Always a fun place to visit if you ever get a chance to go to Iceland. And we talked about some of the Spanish explorers here, Ponce de Leon. I don't even know if I remember telling you about this. In search of the fountain of youth. You've always been told that by your high school teachers, I'm sure, or your middle school teachers, and that's really not true. Ponce de Leon was not, that was not attached to Ponce de Leon and the fountain of youth for about 150 years after the death of Ponce de Leon. We mentioned about Balboa. Balboa, the first European, first Spaniard to cross the Isthmus of Panama, and observed how calm the Pacific was, and actually named it the Ocean of the South, the Sea of the South Sea. And Ferdinand Magellan, the first to circumnavigate the globe. All right, that's kind of interesting with that too. And I think we closed out the class period talking about some of the conquistadors here, the conquistadors with Cortez, Hernando Cortez, who defeated the Aztecs, and also Francisco Pizarro, who defeated the Incas, and took over the Inca silver mines there and made Spain one of the wealthiest nations in the world for the next 100 years. Alrighty, folks, we're going to move into a different section here, and let me just tell you that we're going to somewhat leave the late Middle Ages. Actually, we're going to be in the latter parts of the late Middle Ages, and the late Middle Ages are going to be followed by the early modern age. That early modern age, which will stay into place up until the French Revolution, which we'll get to next semester, and also the Industrial Revolution, which we will likewise get to next semester. But a new change is going to take place in Europe, and where this change is going to take place is on the Italian Peninsula. About the year 1350, a cultural movement will begin, and it's just going to cascade across the Italian Peninsula. It will stay there for about 150 years, and for reasons that I'll tell you about at a later time, it will then move into Northern Europe, particularly up in the area of where Germany is. So let's go to our camera, and let me get the light for you just right here, and I'm sure you'll want to take some of the notes on this. But as I said, we're going to see a different cultural movement to take place, and it's will offer alternatives to Middle Age literary and artistic expression. Now, the time we talk about here is referred to as the Renaissance. It will last from about 1350 to about 1550, and as I said a second ago, the first 150 years it will be on the Italian Peninsula, and then for the last 50 years it will move into Northern Europe, and particularly that of Germany, as I said a few minutes ago. Now, Renaissance actually translates to mean rebirth. It is a rebirth. And a lot of people mistakenly believe that this is a rebirth of Greece, a rebirth of the Roman Empire, and it is not that whatsoever. But what we're going to see here at this time, new trends. And these new trends are going to take place in philosophy, in literature, in art, in sculpture, and architecture. Today we'll talk about philosophy and literature and a little bit in art, and in our next lecture we will go into more in-depth in art and the sculpture and the architecture. And I will tell you about this period. It's you'll either like it and like it very much, or you probably will not care for it very much. When I first started teaching this course many years ago, I always found the Renaissance to not be very interesting. I never had an art course in my life, and I grew to have an appreciation of it, and it's one of my favorite topics here to lecture on the Renaissance period, and particularly the next lecture that we have, not the one today. All right, now, like I said, a Renaissance will move from Italy, and actually it's the Italian Peninsula, because we don't have Italy created as a country at that time, and it will move into Northern Europe. And what we'll find here in Italy is that large numbers of Western scholars will learn Greek, and that's just something that we had not had before here. You know, most of the scholars were versed in Latin, but they were not versed, fluent in Greece. And for many of the scholars of this period of time, they will read the entire Greek classics here, and they're going to draw wisdom, and they're going to draw wisdom from these classics. Now, for this culture, it is not pagan, and what I mean by that, pagan is just not religious at all, but it will be much more secular than what we had in the High Middle Ages, and also in the Late Middle Ages too. Now, as it moves to Northern Europe, you'll find that we see more secular individuals, or I should say, more religious individuals will emerge out of this. Okay, now, one of the things associated with this, and we're moving into the areas here, you know, of philosophy, is a stress upon what is referred to as humanism. Now, I want you to think about this in your college curriculum here, humanities. And what courses do you take when you're in the humanities here? And you find courses like English and speech and things such as that, and art. And that's what humanism stresses. Humanism stresses languages, classical literature, culture, and history. And I like that sort of thing. All right, and what they do in humanism, what they will stress, the dignity of man. Man, who is the greatest of all God's creatures, secondly only to that of angels. All right, so the Italian Renaissance is where this will take place, at least for the first 150 years. Why does it do so? Well, Italy had the most advanced urban society, and that's kind of hard to believe. It honestly is here, folks. Italy had the most advanced society. Aristocrats lived in cities. This kept the wealth within the cities itself. If we move into Northern Europe, as we've talked about at earlier times, where the aristocracy lived, they lived away from the community. They lived in castles, lived in chateaux, beautiful chateaux with fragrant gardens, and this took the wealth of the aristocracy outside of the city. But on the Italian peninsula, it was different. For the wealthy individuals, they lived in city centers. This kept the money right within the city itself, you know, and that's a big difference with that too. Okay, they also had top-notch schools, very educated societies here with the upper class. They were fluent in Latin, they were fluent in Greek, they had the best teachers in the world, in Europe, and so what we find is we get a very well educated upper class on the Italian peninsula. And when we have a well-educated upper class, they are able to literally, pardon the expression, think out of the box. If we have an uneducated society there, they have closed thinking. You know, I don't mean that to be offensive to anyone, but that's pretty much the way that it is. And it seems like it is so unusual. And I want to spend a few minutes here talking about this here. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase here, the pigs. And you hear it a little bit in Europe, not so much here, but for the pigs, and that's what they're called, the pig countries. You have Portugal, and we have Italy, and we have Greece, and we have Spain. All right, now we've not been negative on any of those areas, any of those countries, but I will tell you today that if you visit any of the pig countries, you're going to find that it is just not to the same speed as the countries like France, or Germany, or England, such as that, or Austria. These are the pig countries. And I'll say it again. We have Portugal, we have Italy, we have Greece, and we have Spain. And when you visit those countries, and I want you to go to those countries, I encourage you to do so very much. But don't be surprised. You're going to see a lot of poverty there. And for some crazy reason, I shouldn't really say this, you see people that are very thin there, almost to the point of being emaciated. They have no money, or they have very limited money there, and they just don't have the money to gorge themselves on food. So we find a very thin society, for the most part, in all of those places, the pig countries there. Poverty is just, or I should say unemployment is just enormous there. For folks your age, and I'm talking about people that are, 18 to 30 years old, unemployment in each of those countries is about 50%. Now, you got a very well-educated society there today. College education, university education is paid for as long as you have the academic, scholastic ability to pass collegiate work, university work there. You can stay in college. And that's what most of these young folks do. They stay in college and stay in college for as long as they can because unemployment is 50%. And if you get out of college, what are you going to do? Then you can't find a job. So we see, unfortunately, a mass exodus of young people your ages out of those pig countries, and they go to places such as France and they go to Germany because that's where they can get the jobs here. And I'm not exaggerating. That is exactly the way that it is. Even in older people, such as people that are in their 30s or in their 40s, unemployment throughout the nation there, it's about 20%. So anyway, and that's sad. But I want you to go to those countries there. You will enjoy them. They're all special and unique in their own ways. Okay, so let's get back to the Italian Peninsula, and why did we have the Renaissance to take place there? All right, so let's move on with this. And with this, wealth encourages support for culture. And many of these cities would compete with each other. They would try to, I'm talking about in the Italian Peninsula here, see who can construct the most elaborate bridges, the most elaborate monuments within the city itself, the most elaborate churches and cathedrals. And all of these cities would compete with each other. Rome would compete with Florence. Florence would compete with Venice, that sort of thing. All right. And I'm telling you right now, when you travel through these Italian cities, particularly if you're going through, say, Florence, Firenze, if you go through there, you see monuments, busts, monuments, full-size monuments, everywhere. You walk through a park, and a park will have 50 different monuments. People in our country would have, they would just get exhausted tearing down those statues, tearing down those monuments. That was an unkind thing to say. I should not have said that, but I'm not going to take it back anyway. All right, so anyway, you walk through a park in Florence, for example, 50 statues present there. And you ask your tour guide, you'll say, who's that a statue of? And the tour guide will respond, it's just another one of those Medicis, another one of those Medicis. Because they was a wealthy family, even had some popes that were Medicis, and they were a wealthy family there, and they would pay to have their statues constructed, or a bust constructed. All right, and I'm not exaggerating that. And we also had at that time these Renaissance popes. Now, think about this. These are the popes that are present during the Renaissance period of time. And we'll come back and talk about each one of these at a later time, a little bit, particularly when we get into the Protestant Reformation. But one of these popes was Alexander VI. Alexander VI, 1492, 1503. Julius II. If you thumb through the pages in your textbook, you can see some portraits of these individuals. And I'll show you some at a more appropriate time. 1503, 1515, Leo X, 1515, 1521, all of this during the times of the Renaissance. And for what many of these popes would do, and you'll see this, they would actually hire artists, paint my portrait. You see this, Julius II would hire Raphael, paint my portrait, and in paying for this, hire a architect, construct my tomb. And anyway, they would even be advised, the Pope would be advised, that's bad luck for you to do so. If you construct a tomb while you're living, as a final resting place while you're living, it will just lead to an untimely, quick death for you. But that's what I'm trying to point out to you, is that many of the prominent people of those times would employ these Renaissance artists or sculptors or architects, to do images of them. All right, so anyway, okay, so let's talk about some of the writers and philosophers of this period. And we're going to see some interesting individuals here. Perhaps you've had a chance to study some of these individuals. One in particular, and I like this individual, quite frankly, here. Read a lot of his writings here. We call him, and you probably, if you take world literature course, he's referred to as Francis Petrarch. Petrarch, if we put it in Italian here, is Francesco Petrarca. And he wrote these, he's considered to be the father of Renaissance humanism, and he wrote these Petrarchan sonnets. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read any of these Petrarchan sonnets. They're all kind of fun to engage in. And by the way, Petrarch was madly in love with Laura, but Laura, his girlfriend, his female associate anyway, she died from the plague, and it just literally broke his heart. So he was a quite religious individual here. But read these if you wish to do so. I've read these a number of times through the years here. Blessed be the day happens to be one of them. It was the morning is another one. Father in heaven is another one. And she used to let her golden hair fly free. And of course that's in reference there to his deceased girlfriend, Laura. All right, Petrarchan Songs is what it is known as. Okay, let's move on here. He is the first writer of the Renaissance. We also have associated with this what is referred to as classic humanism. This is eloquence and the study of classical literature. Some of the people associated with this, Leon Battista Alberti, and he wrote this piece called On the Family. On the Family. The nuclear family was instituted by nature for the well-being of humanity. Man's nature, just your general nature, equips you for usefulness to the family, society, and serving the state. And another individual, and let's see where I have his name here, is a person by the name of Lorenzo Valla. So let's learn how to pronounce that. Valla, not Vala or Vala. He wrote this piece on Notes on the New Testament. Notes on the New Testament. He actually believed that the Vulgate had been misinterpreted by St. Jerome. But anyway, notes on the New Testament. And we're going to even see, in addition to this, as we get into the Renaissance, as we get into the Protestant Reformation. All right, some of the other writers of this period of time here. An interesting individual here, which is known as Marsilio Ficino. Marsilio Ficino. And wrote this piece, which is called Hermetic Corpus, the airtight body. The airtight body is what it literally translates to mean here. The immortal soul is miserable inside of the mortal body. All right, and another individual here of this group. And let me move my paper down here. All right, just work on your pronunciation with this individual's name here. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola. All right, he was referred to, he was known as Pico. And he wrote this piece here, which is called Oration on the Dignity of Man. There's nothing more wonderful than man. All right, and one of my favorites here, folks, is writing. It impresses me very much. To read his writing, it will literally put you to sleep with that. But let's work on the pronunciation of this individual's name here, Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli. All right, he is considered to be the prince of the Renaissance political thinkers. He wrote one piece which was called Discourses on Livy, which praised the Roman Republic as the greatest society of all time. But what he is best known for, he wrote this piece which was called The Prince. And let me show you what it looks like here. Here's the book here, which is known as The Prince. One of my students gave that to me a number of years ago. Let's see if I have it highlighted here, and do not have it highlighted right there. So, yeah, well, there it is. I have a couple of pages highlighted, and it was sleep time here. And good book here, but it will put you to sleep if you read this. You know, it's better to read the summaries of it here. It tells you a little bit more about it. If you wish to visit Machiavelli's burial site here, here's where it is. It's in the church of the Basilica di Santa Croce, which is present in Florence itself. I mentioned that church to you at an earlier time. This is where Michelangelo is buried there. Galileo is buried there. You know, it has a statue of Dante Alighieri outside of it here. And here's the resting place here of Machiavelli here. All right, and what he's best known for here, folks, of course, is The Prince, which was like a guidebook, you know, for leaders of that period of time. It was like a pocket primer, you know, for the leaders of that time. The supreme obligation of a ruler is to maintain the power and safety of the country over which he rules. No consideration of justice or mercy or treaties should be allowed to interfere or to come into the way. The head of the state should not take granted the loyalty or affection of all of his subject individuals. And I just penciled this out for you a few seconds ago, and these are 6 qualities that Machiavelli identified associated with a true leader. And I wrote these, like I said a second ago here, it's written in small print, but I want you to think about this and think about the leaders that we have today. Think about the president of the country, past president of countries, think about some of our military personnel that we have had, or just leaders in general, you know, college presidents, university presidents, and 6 qualities that they must have. And of course, you know, if we use like a university president here, you don't want to have a strong army, you want to have a strong faculty. But for a true leader, you must have a strong army, you must have loyalty of the people, loyalty of the faculty here, you must be carefully generous, you must be carefully merciful, you must be feared by the people, and you must be capable of fighting like a beast. Well, do you know any true leaders? Do you know any true princes? I have lived, and I've had the fortune to live under 13 presidents of the United States. I don't know what will take place here in November when we have our presidential elections. There's a chance that I may have the opportunity to live under a 14th president of the United States. I hope that is not the case. I'd rather just presently live under 13 presidents. And of all those 13 presidents that I have lived under their administrations, I'm not sure if I can really come up with a true prince that has all those 6 qualities that Machiavelli suggest anyway. I've seen some military figures that I thought will probably had all of those qualities. George Patton, Chesty Puller, who was a Marine Corps colonel and general here. Those are individuals that are true leaders, true rulers. I don't know. You think about that in our presidential candidates that we have today. Well, maybe I'm stepping on your toes, so let's go back to our lecture here. Okay, here. So, Machiavelli with the prince here. Now, another individual that we have is a person called Baldassare Castiglione. A Renaissance writer of this period of time. And he wrote this book here, which was called The Book of the Courtier. The Book of the Courtier. How to act like a gentleman. The true Renaissance man must be brave and funny, witty, courteous, and must be well educated. That is a true Renaissance man. How to act like a true gentleman. He stressed that court ladies should be gracious entertainers here. All right, so let's leave this subject, and I always like that subject as we go through this, and let's move into an area where most people so closely identify with the Renaissance, and we're going to talk about art. Now, for the Renaissance artists, and we'll just get started with this today. I've just got a couple of these artists, I think 3 of them, to go through. When we come back on our next time, you know, we'll spend a little bit more time going into Michelangelo and so forth. But for these artists, they use a type of art which is called chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro. This is a mixing of lights and shades, a blending of lights and shades. They also use oils, frescoes, and you'll have to get Mr. Brown or your art instructor to elaborate on that. But frescoes is where we take watercolors and paint upon wet plaster. Oils allows you to work much slower because oils dry longer than the frescoes do. All right, but anyway, okay, so some of the artists of this period of time, there one who is known as Masaccio. Giotto Reborn is what he's sometimes referred to. If you're following in your textbook here, folks, I'm on page 398, and I try to get the contrast here for you. And this shows you Masaccio's painting here, the Trinity with the Virgin. Masaccio. At a later time in the class period, if I can remember, I'll show you some more paintings here of Masaccio. But Giotto Reborn died at an early age, by the way. Okay, so let's see who else we have. Another individual here of this period of time, Sandro Botticelli, and I'll show you another likeness of another portrait of his in just a little bit, but one that he's very well familiar with, or people are familiar with, is one which is called The Birth of Venice. You can see it in your textbook. It's on the next page here, 399, I believe it is anyway. And we see The Birth of Venice. We look over on this side, we see Cronus, who is the god of time, and Aphrodite is here, and Aphrodite is actually being created from the foam of the water there. All right, Sandro Botticelli here. Okay, and shall we move right along? And then one of the very best, I'm going to just take this down here, one of the very best known is that of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, who was born in the city of Florence, Florencia. When you visit that town today, you can kind of relate to Leonardo in Florence. True Renaissance man. Notice the times in which he lived here: 1452, 1519. His father was a lawyer. His mother was a peasant woman. He's a homosexual. He's a worshiper of nature here. But he did everything. Kind of like the Bo Jackson, if you know who I'm talking about with that. And he was a painter, an architect, a musician, a mathematician, engineer, inventor, a physicist, naturalist. Like I said, he worshiped nature. He would often purchase caged birds and then release the caged birds. His principal problems here was his inability to complete a project, and also just his slowness. I'm sure that you have probably seen people like that before. Let's see here. I want to share a couple of things here with you with Leonardo. And let's see here. Here's Madonna with a flower. That's one of the paintings here of Leonardo. This painting, this photograph was taken in the Hermitage, which is in St. Petersburg, Russia, which is one of the finest art museums that you'll ever have the opportunity to visit there. And let's see what else we have here. And I'm going to actually use this right now and show you another one of the paintings here. This is called the Annunciation, which is this one here by Leonardo. So I don't have to bring this out again here. Here's another painting here by Sandro Botticelli here, which is a portrait of a young woman. And let's see, here's one by Masaccio, which is here, which is the expulsion of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. All right, and also, and this is kind of interesting too, and let's see here, and this is also from Leonardo. You recognize who this is? Recognize who this is? This is Mona Lisa. This is Mona Lisa. Is she smiling or is she not? I don't know. Here's another, and this is a photograph of the Mona Lisa, and this Mona Lisa, which is in the Louvre Museum. The Louvre Museum, or Louvre, is what they pronounce it in Paris. But if you go there, and at a later time I'll show you a photograph of what the Louvre appears as, but you need to go early, and I mean, as soon as the doors open, like 9 o'clock in the morning. It's a little bit expensive. It's about 20 euros to go through the Louvre. If you really want to do it right, your folks plan on spending about a day, maybe even 2 days within the Louvre itself. If you're cheap and you don't want to spend the 20 euros to buy your ticket there, I think like Tuesday evenings it's open free to the public, so you may wish to do that. If you do visit the Louvre, you'll pick out a map. They'll give you a map, hand it out to you, and the first thing that you want to do is go to the display room here where the Mona Lisa is. It is a very, very popular place. It's the most popular room within the Louvre, and I promise you, good folks, if you are at 9:15, there'll be 150, 200 people that are present there, and you cannot get close enough to take a good photograph of that. And I was very fortunate to be able to get right next to the portrait there. And the amazing thing about it, and I hate to keep talking about places I've been, that sort of thing, but another very fine museum is that of the Prado, and the Prado Museum, which is present in Madrid, and Madrid, of course, is in Spain, and it's almost as nice as the Louvre. It really is, or the Hermitage. And going through there, they have the Leonardo room, and when you enter into the Leonardo room, guess what you see? And this is what you see right there. This is Mona Lisa. And most people don't realize that Leonardo painted several Mona Lisas. So you're not seeing the same Mona Lisa in Paris as you're seeing in Madrid. It's different Mona Lisas. They look the same, but it's actually different paintings. And so anyway, that's kind of interesting, that. Okay, now, one of the things that Leonardo is so famous for, and I want to show this to you here, folks, which is called The Last Supper. So let me show you here with the Last Supper, and there's so much to this, and I love this, and I've never seen this in person, by the way, and I would like to do this. It's located in Milan, if you will, and the Last Supper. And so let's go through this for a second here. And if you were in my classroom, I have the Last Supper. I have a portrait of that is about 4 feet long. It's huge. It's about 4 feet by about 2.5, 3 feet, and I bring it to the front of the classroom and point all this out to my classes here. But if you look at all of this, we can see over on this side, here is Bartholomew. This is Bartholomew that's present here. Here is James. This is James the Minor. And if we go over to the next individual here, this is Andrew. Andrew is present here. Notice here the detached hand, and I don't know what that represents. Now look low. The lowest figure in this, of all the figures where you go across like this, the lowest figure here is that of Judas. And it's Judas who is present here. And if you look carefully here in the portrait, you can see that Judas is holding a bag of coins, a bag of silver here. And if you notice also here on the table, I can't see it right here, but somewhere through here in the table here, that's where salt is present. And salt is symbolic that bad luck, something terrible is about to take place. Remember what this portrait is. This is a portrait of the Last Supper here. All right, if we go to the next figure here, this next figure who is present here is Peter. Now, is that really Peter? Well, if it was a little bit larger, or you magnify this a little bit, that's a female. That is a woman that is present there who is leaning in the direction of Peter and away from Jesus. And this woman, of course, is Mary Magdalene. It is Mary Magdalene. All right, then we come over here to Jesus, who is present right here. And if you look carefully on the table here in front of all of these individuals there, you will find that there's no wine, there's no bread, even though we call it the Last Supper. And if we continue on, we'll find here's Thomas. And notice there the finger that is pointed up here. Here's Thomas. And we go to the next figure here, which is James Major. And the next figure here, and this figure is Philip. And the next figure over here, this is Matthew. And if we go to the next figure here, this is Thaddeus. But look carefully at Thaddeus. Thaddeus, if by name, Thaddeus, but this is Leonardo. Leonardo painted himself into the Last Supper. And the last individual over here is Simon the Zealot. So anyway, it's a fascinating subject with that. Okay, so let me see where we are here, folks. I want to go back to this for a second because I forgot to mention this. Let's go back to this. And this is important to recognize. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to show this to you here. And I just wrote this in a little bit ago. If you see this figure such as this figure, that represents maleness. That represents the male. And if you see this figure here, this represents a female. All right, so let's go back to the Last Supper here. And I want you to take a look where Mary is present here. Let me try to get that angle just right. Mary is present, here. And we have Jesus who is present here. All right, so what I want to do here, let's make an emblem here. Look here. We're going to go here, and here, and here, and here. So you see the male figure symbol here, and we see the female symbol, which is right here. Am I reading too much into this? All right. And if we put it all together here, we get an M. We get an M, which is Mary for Mary of Magdala. Okay. All right. Anyway, and I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that's kind of interesting with that. All righty, folks. I think we'll call it quits for today. Here, I've been talking to you for about 33 minutes here. And that's enough, and I don't want to use up all my time here talking about the Renaissance. When we come back, we'll spend some time here with Raphael, spend some time with Michelangelo, a lot of time with Michelangelo next time we get together. And then we're going to move up into the Northern Renaissance, okay? All righty, thank you.